Welcome back to Lam's Cryptoverse. If you haven't already, please check out a similar presentation. This one's on equities sentiment turning bearish. There's another one that's called Bitcoin and crypto sentiment turns bearish or neutral to bearish. So let's get started. I've got a lot to talk about. So around mid-June, I became bullish on Bitcoin, crypto as a whole, and equities. That's because of these readings, these sentiment readings. And there were so many of them that they gave something called confluence, meaning they all agreed with each other. So there's a few ways of reading equity sentiment. So I'm just going to focus on equity, as I said earlier. So the first one is from CNN. And then is Google search trends, believe it or not, you could do yourself. And there's options data and futures positioning. So let's get started. The first one is CNN Business. And this one, which was very bullish in mid-June because investors were fearful. Remember, these are contrarian indicators. It's moved from fear, extreme fear, to neutral on the edge of greed. And this data, there's a little box there, you can read it. It's based on multiple indicators, sub-indicators, I should say, like market breadth, meaning how many stocks are rising versus declining, relative strength of stocks, volatility, the put-to-call ratio, high yield, and even safe haven demand. And that's looking at basically treasuries versus equities. Next, this is something you can do yourself at home. I just did this last night. You go to Google Trends and you can type in anything you want. So what I did is I focused on finance, the finance category over the last 5 years, and I just typed in bear market. And if you look, there were a lot of investors looking at the term bear market during March 2020, as well as in March, I suppose, or a little before, maybe February, March of this year. And now, as you can see, we've gone way down to basically flat again, neutral territories. So of course, from a contrarian point of view, this is not bullish. Then we've got options data. And as I discussed many times, there's lots of ways of looking at options data. In the equity market, I like to focus on what's called the total put-to-call ratio. And this is sourced out of the CBOE. And this ratio was bullish again in mid-June, and it's gone down to about 0.5. This isn't bearish yet, but it's pretty darn low. It gets really bearish when it goes down to below 0.45. So we're at 0.5, so we're awfully close from getting to bearish territory. Futures positioning on the VIX. Okay, there's a lot of ways of looking at futures activity. You could look at curves, whether or not they're backwardation or contango. You can look at the S&P mini index at the Russell 2000. But the whole point, if you're a contrarian investor like me, and that's how I read sentiment from a contrarian point of view, what you want to look at is positioning. And this means positioning in terms of large speculators. And in this chart here, you see this green line right here? I'm pointing at it with my pointer. Yeah, I just circled it. That line there, that's yeah, I'll put an arrow towards it. Oh, it's a fuzzy arrow. Basically, that green line is saying that speculators are bearish on volatility, meaning the VIX. So they think the VIX is going to go down more. So from a contrarian point of view, this is bearish because investors are basically saying, or large speculators, I should say, are saying that the VIX is going to continue going down, meaning the stock market, in terms of S&P 500, is going to continue rising. So I know it's a lot to take in, so you could go back to this presentation later and read my notes. So here's another way of looking at futures positioning. This is, and I'm going to highlight it here. Hopefully I could do a better job with my arrow. There we go. This is, if you look at the green line, this is large speculators. They're still betting that the Russell 2000, and in this case the S&P 500, they're still betting that it's going to decline. How do I know that? Because the green line is declining. So they're still shorting equities. So this is a good thing. This is, I would interpret as a good thing for equities, or neutral. So this data, positioning data, is contradictory to what we're seeing for other data. So overall, I would say that the sentiment data is bearish for the market, or to neutral, but this one is bullish. So I'm sorry to say that not all the data agrees with all the other data, and sometimes you get contradictory data, and you need to understand how to interpret that data. So what I do is I look at all the data together, and if 90% of the data is saying one thing, that's what I go by. So 90% of the data in this case, of the sentiment data, is saying that we're getting towards bearish territory. And speaking of which, what's our verdict? What's the key takeaway? Well, 90% of the data has moved towards neutral to bearish. For example, the CNN fear greed indicator is moving towards greed. So we're bearish. The put to call data is moving towards greed. So I'm bearish. The implied volatility data and skewness data in options activity is getting towards the greed level. So I'm bearish. And the futures position, as I said earlier, is more neutral because the VIX positioning is bearish, but speculators, and that's that green line I talked to you about earlier, speculators are still somewhat bearish on the equity indices. So what does that mean? How do I interpret this data? I think that the S&P, which is around 4,300, could go higher. Maybe it goes up 5%. Maybe it goes up towards 4,500. But it's going to be difficult from that point on to go higher. And either way, even at this point now, we're at 4,300 S&P. That means risk levels are high. So if you're a risk-averse investor, or you like to use risk management techniques, now's a good time to take chips off the table, right? You don't want to make that last dollar that you can make, right? Because risk levels are high. So you want to take chips off the table and be a smart investor. Well, at least that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to get more risk averse now as equity markets rise. So thank you all for listening, and remember to hit the like button and subscribe, and please look at our other videos, including the Bitcoin sentiment video. Thank you again. Bye-bye.